My name is Ai-jen Poo, and welcome. It is an understatement to say that 2020 is a critical year for our democracy and for each of us.
I'm Alicia Garza. In response, women are rising, organizing, working together, and preparing to get out the vote in unprecedented ways.
Hey, and I'm Cecile Richards, and today we're going to talk about proven, effective tactics being deployed this year for increasing voter engagement and persuasion in 2020.
And I'm Maria Teresa Kumar. We're also going to ask how others can strategically join, that means you, the movement to win, and why it's critical to center racial justice, gender justice, and economic justice in all this work.
And I'm Kristin Rowe-Finkbeiner. We're also going to talk about what policies are igniting women voters and need to be moved forward immediately. I also have the honor of moderating today. I'm also the executive director of Moms Rising. And I have the honor of being here with all of you who are tuning in, with all of our listeners, with all of our viewers, to hear this panel of sheroes, democracy lifters, nation changers, history makers, and justice raisers. And we're gonna jump right in with the first very big question that's top of mind for people across our country right now. Amazing news this week. US Senator Kamala Harris. Are you excited? She's the first African-American and South Asian American vice presidential nominee on a major ticket in our nation's entire history. What does this nomination mean? First to Black women, and also to everyone to have US Senator Harris on the Democratic ticket. And while we're talking about Senator Harris, let's also highlight another recent, very important 2020 breakthrough leader, Cori Bush. Can you comment on what racial justice activist Cori Bush's recent stunning US House upset means in terms of, importantly, opening new spaces for more transformative justice and policy to pass in the future? We have a big panel, so I'm going to introduce each panelist as they answer, starting with Alicia Garza. Alicia Garza founded Black Futures Lab in 2018 to make Black communities powerful in politics. An innovator, strategist, and organizer, Alicia is the co-creator of Black Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter Global Network, an international organizing project to end state violence and oppression against Black people. The Black Lives Matter Global Network now has 40 chapters in 4 countries. Alicia also serves as a strategy and partnerships director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance, the nation's premier voice for millions of domestic workers in the United States. She is also the co-founder of Supermajority, and she shares her thoughts on politics and pop culture on her podcast, which you must tune into, called Lady Don't Take No. Don't miss it. Welcome, Alicia. What are your thoughts on our first big, bold question?
Hey, well, I'm really excited to be here and definitely excited to be here with my sisters. I have a lot of thoughts on this question, so I'll run through them very quickly. Number one, this is a historic moment and it's a win for our communities and it's something that we should be celebrating. Quite frankly, you know, for a lot of us, I think we're moving into this election cycle and wondering what it's going to take to make sure that people don't stay home. I don't think right now the choice is between Trump and Biden. I think the choice is about whether or not our communities think it's worth it to show up to the polls. And then, of course, because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, we are not even sure if it's safe to show up at the polls. And so having a historic choice like Senator Kamala Harris, I think matters. I think it energizes women. I think it energizes Black communities. I think it energizes communities of color. And that's exactly what we need right now. And I say this as somebody who supported somebody completely different in the primary, but I'm super clear about what's on the ballot. What's on the ballot is the future of our country. What's on the ballot is whether or not we're going to descend into fascism or whether we are going to propel forward into living into the majoritarian values that I think so many of us want to see at this moment. And so for me, Senator Harris is the right decision at the right time for the right reasons. And I'm clear that it's time to go. With that being said, we're also seeing unprecedented wins across the nation, whether it be in Missouri, whether it be in New York, whether we've seen half, right? One half of the squad actually winning their primaries and winning by a landslide. Women of color are on fire, and communities of color right now are on fire. We are winning up and down the ballot, and I think that that bodes very well, not just for what happens in November, but it sets the stage for us to win bigger and bigger and bigger victories for our communities, which frankly, another period of this current administration is not going to allow us to do. That's just fact. So for me, I'm feeling hopeful in this moment, but I'm also not unaware of what this moment is going to require of us, which is that we make sure that every single person has the opportunity to weigh in and make their voice heard, no matter what's going on around us. We've got to make sure that elections are fully funded and that they are free and fair. And we have to make sure, right, that we're protecting our ability to participate in a pandemic through saving, right, the US Postal Service, which is right now under attack by this administration. So those are my quick thoughts on where we are and what's at stake. And yes, I'm excited about Senator Harris. Let's go.
Let's go. Thank you so much, Alicia. Next up, we have another Shiro speaker coming forward, Ai-jen Poo. Ai-jen Poo is an award-winning organizer, author, and a leading voice in the women's movement. She is the executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, director of caregiving across generations, co-founder of Supermajority, co-host of the Sunstorm podcast, and a trustee of the Ford Foundation. Ai-jen is a nationally recognized expert in elder and family care, the future of work, and what's at stake for women of color. She's also the author of the celebrated book, The Age of Dignity, Preparing for the Elder Boom in a Changing America. Welcome, Ai-jen. What's your take on the first big, bold question facing our nation?
Thank you, Kristin, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm so excited about this conversation with so many of my Shiros. I couldn't agree more with what Alicia just said. I mean, we agree about a lot of things, but she just nailed it. And so I would say, let's go again, exclamation point. It is historic. And I think it's also super important to remember that organizing and movement building is a big part of what makes these moments possible. Organizing and movement building is all about expanding the realm of what's possible in politics and policy. And I think, and in representation, and representation matters. And I do think it's that leaders like Senator Harris and Cori Bush are going to make new realities possible at the policy level for women of color and for all of us. One example that's super important for me to lift up is the fact that Senator Harris is the lead Senate sponsor for the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, which is historic legislation that would protect a workforce that's been excluded systematically from labor rights since the New Deal. And it's a majority women of color workforce, always has been. And it's a workforce that's incredibly valued and has always been kind of put to the side. She sponsored that bill, and it's just an indication of the kind of policy possibilities that having a different kind of representation enables. And so, you know, I just think it's like putting our people in is not just about putting our people in, it's about what gets made possible from a policy perspective and how we can move progress forward. And I'll also just say for the record that we have a lot of really big challenges as a country. And I just want to straight up say that when it comes to solving problems and dealing with challenges, I want women and women of color in charge.
Thank you. Agree. Next up with this first big, bold, spectacular question, we have Maria Teresa Kumar. Maria Teresa Kumar is Voto Latino's founding president, as well as an activist, social entrepreneur, and Emmy-nominated MSNBC contributor. Leveraging youth, technology, social platforms, and influencers, Voto Latino is the largest Latinx voter registration and advocacy organization, reaching 29 million monthly viewers. She also, under her leadership, the organization has won numerous awards as well for original programming and has registered 748,591 voters. Thank you. In January, and since January, 248,591 have been registered in just that short time. So welcome, Maria Teresa. What's your first take on this big, bold, spectacular question?
Well, first of all, thank you, Kristin, for putting us together. These are some of my favorite women, and I learn from them every single time when we are in community. And, shout out to folks who are tuning in, that if your world seems a little uneasy and restless, you're not alone. Take a breath and take care of you, because we need you ready and charged up for November. And for us at Voto Latino, I cannot underscore what Alicia said, what Ajum said, what I'm sure Cecile will underscore. There's no plan B. But what we do know is that when women are fired up, we get things done. With the selection of Kamala Harris, full disclosure, she was one of the few people that sat down and talked to me about Voto Latino when it was just an idea. So I really, really love her. She believed in the idea that was just on a piece of paper. But what I respect about her is not the fact that, not just her bio, but her resume. And I think that in her selection, what Joe Biden was able to do was break the stereotype that women, and in particular women of color, are a monolith. Because he had an incredible slate of candidates that as women, but as professionals, had to stand on their own. Turning that around from anybody moving forward is going to be impossible. We are now going to be able to go enter rooms based on our experience. And he had such a great slate of women, in particular Kamala Harris. I think that what we should highlight is that she controlled and oversaw the second largest Department of Justice, only to the federal government. And if we need someone in office that will understand how to fix the mess that Barr has done under the Trump administration, she is the one to do it. She knows the levers of power. She knows how to mobilize, and she cares about women, and she cares about the most marginalized. And I deeply believe that if you care about the most marginalized, we could address all the systemic injustices that we have, and it lifts all boats. And I deeply believe that what we are about to inherit from the Trump administration is also a once in a lifetime moment to correct the wrongs. What COVID has exposed was all the systemic injustices that we have all been trying to fight day in and day out since the civil rights marches. And now we actually know that there's a critical mass of Americans who are on our side and get that things need to get done. I cannot wait to see Kamala Harris at the White House with Joe Biden. I cannot wait to see Cori Bush, because she espouses the very issues that right now a squad of four are constantly debating in Congress. And with that, the more we can give them, we can have their back, the more that they know that they have the support from the groundswell. I know that we will be able to negotiate with this administration, and that is the most important. So with that, thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you, thank you. Now we have Cecile Richards. Cecile Richards is a national leader for women's rights and social and economic justice, and co-founder of Supermajority, a new organization fighting for gender equity. She's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Make Trouble, and as president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund for 12 years, she worked to increase affordable access to reproductive health care and to build a healthier and safer world for women and young people. After starting her career as a labor organizer working with women earning the minimum wage, she went on to start her own grassroots organizations and served as the deputy chief of staff to House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, another Shiro who we all love. So welcome, Cecile. What's your take on the first big, bold question?
Well, thank you, Kristin. And I feel like my sisters here have pretty much covered the waterfront. I think this has been a week that gave us the kind of energy we're going to need to go through November 3rd. I think the announcement of Kamala Harris, I think it's important, all of the things people have said, all the firsts, but honestly, and I've been working on elections a long time, the most qualified, the most prepared vice presidential nominee that I ever remember. And I'm really glad that Maria Teresa talked about her experience and her record, because, it's interesting as we see now, I guess interesting isn't the right word, but we see the attacks coming at her that are racist, that are sexist, that the president himself now begins to bring up birtherism again. This demonstrates to me the fact that they have nothing to say about Kamala Harris, about her qualifications or her competency and her leadership. And so I think it's going to be, I guess, without recounting all of her traits, which everyone has said, I think there has never been a more important time for people in this country to push back on every lie that comes out of the Republicans from the president on down, because it's going to be relentless. Because I feel like the stakes for all of us, and beating Donald Trump was important, but the stakes just got a lot higher, and the opportunities just got a lot greater, I think, with Kamala's appointment. I had the pleasure of working with her to defend access to Planned Parenthood, which was, of course, that was Paul Ryan and Donald Trump's number one goal, number one promise, that they were going to defund Planned Parenthood. And it was because of folks like Kamala Harris who fought back, and the reason why 3 million folks can still go to Planned Parenthood today, each year, to get the health care that they need. The other piece, so enormous energy. I feel like, look, there couldn't be a better moment for this panel, because women have fueled all the energy in this election, the primaries, state by state by state, and it is women there, and particularly women of color, and particularly Black women, that are going to carry us over the line on November 3rd. I think it's just without a doubt. I would only say about Cori Bush, one, congratulations. I haven't had the chance to talk to her yet, but there are a record number of Black women running for Congress this year. This is an historic moment. And so I think it's important that we know that the fuel for this election is partly going to happen because of the presidential race, but it's also going to be happening at the local level. I'm from Texas, a state which we don't usually brag about, but in 2018, we sent the first two Latinas, Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia, to Congress, and exactly, Maria Teresa, and their numbers are going to swell this year. The most exciting competitive races in the country are largely being led by women of color. Candace Valenzuela, who just won her primary and is now poised to become another member of Congress from Texas. So I think the exciting thing about this moment is there is an abundance of opportunity. Then there's something for everyone to do to make sure that on November 3rd, we win historic elections, not only at the presidential level, but up and down the ballot.
Thank you, Cecile, for firing us up and bringing us into the second big, bold question ahead of all of us, which is, what is on the line right now, this very second? What makes 2020 and the November election so critical for all our listeners, all our viewers, the entire audience, and everybody in this country? Maria Teresa Kumar, we'd love to start with you. What are your thoughts?
Everything is on the line. And I would say that our American identity and our democracy is on the line. What is the country that we want to live in and inherit for our children to inherit? And how do we continue with our moral standing in the world if we are treating the most marginalized as we are? Everything is on the line. And I think that all of us can speak a little bit to each of it. But when I said that this is the very first time since FDR for us to sit back and reimagine what we want our country to look like, this is it. And what excites me is that we have women leading the charge of that change and demanding that change. And we have a generation of young people where we do not have to convince them that climate change is real. We do not have to convince them that choice is real. We do not have to convince them that we have to pay people fairly. We do not have to convince them of immigration reform. What we need to do is convince them to vote. Cultural change, the work that Cecile has led, that Alicia has led, that Ajin has led, that you have led, culture change, that takes years, and we could have a conversation on how long it's taken each of us. But what's beautiful is that this generation that is born gets it. So we need to enfranchise them. I am not concerned with whether Democrats are going to come out and vote. My concern is that people that we talk to every day feel like there's no space for them in this conversation. And what we need is a landslide election. We need a mandate for when we send Joe Biden and Kamala Harris so that we can have a conversation of what is it that the country could look like, but more importantly, how do we nation build today so that we can continue having leadership, and leadership that is respected around the world.
Thank you. Cecile Richards, you're up for the second big, bold question.
Well, obviously there's so many issues we could talk about, but I think it's important. We actually just got out of the field with really deep research and conversation with women of color in particular, women that don't vote. And I can tell you this pandemic is a crisis in their lives, and they do not know how we're getting out of it. And so I guess if just say, apart from all the other issues that we already wanted to work on and think are important, we have a president who has never taken this seriously, who has never listened to experts, to scientists, to healthcare professionals, who kept saying that the pandemic was going to disappear. And instead, here we are months later, kids not being able to start school safely, parents terrified of what to do with their children and their loved ones, teachers being faced with an impossible situation of trying to educate kids remotely or in conditions that no one can say is safe. And all of this was avoidable. Right. It is all at the feet of this administration and this president. So just right off the bat, we have to have a change in administration so we can finally take the healthcare needs and the economic needs of people in this country seriously and get on the road to recovery. And I have zero confidence that this president or that Mitch McConnell, who has stonewalled every piece of progress that the House of Representatives under Nancy Pelosi's leadership has passed. Without these guys out of office, we could very likely be in the same situation months from now. So to me, we are in, as Maria Teresa said, we are in a crisis like we have never imagined. Healthcare, economic, and the front of this crisis are women and women of color, women who are caregivers, women who are educators, women who are trying to take care of their kids and families. And so if there's no other reason that we have got to have a wave of voters show up on November 3rd, it's because we need to end this pandemic and get back to rebuilding our country.
Thank you, Cecile. Next up is Ai-jen Poo for her thoughts on the second big, bold question before everybody in our country.
I'll just build off of what Maria Teresa and Cecile just said, which is that everything is on the line, and I'm seeing it from domestic workers in our movement who have not had income since March and have been struggling to figure out how they're literally going to keep a roof over their heads and feed their children. It's not hyperbole to say it's not even food insecurity anymore. It's about survival. It's about starvation. It's about literally millions of people being on the street. And the fact that the White House Chief of Staff just went on vacation, so negotiations are on pause, just is an indication of the fact that we have people in office who do not care. They do not care that people are in the worst kind of pain imaginable. And they don't want to govern. And it's just not acceptable, it's not tenable, it's not who we are, and it's certainly not who we need to be to get to the future that we want for women, women of color, trans women, all the people that we know deserve dignity, respect, opportunity, and all the things that we believe in. None of that is possible in this context, and so much is possible if we're able to change the context. So that's why everything is at stake.
Thank you, Ai-jen. Next up is Alicia Garza. What's your take on this big, bold question?
Look, everything is at stake right now, and I feel like people may be sick of hearing that, but I'm down to break down why. One of the things that I feel is very important, and I agree with Maria Teresa on this, is for people who are already politically engaged, there's probably no question about what to do in this moment. But there are millions of people who are trying to figure out how to keep a roof over their head, trying to figure out how to take care of kids who can't go back to school right now because of the pandemic, or whose kids are being forced to go back to school because of what this administration is doing around gaslighting us around this public health crisis. There are millions of people out there who are just trying to figure out how to make it day to day. There are trans women who are being killed every single day in this country. And frankly, we have to do the work to bring more people into the fold, not just to vote in November, but to be engaged in the decisions that are being made about us, without us, every single day. And that is the work of this moment. We now have a viable vehicle from which to do that work, to demonstrate how well we've done in bringing more people into the fold. I feel like elections are the moment where we essentially get to test how successful our organizing has been. We get to show how many people we have brought to the side of the values that we know need to be the engine of this country, just like our communities are. And that work is not going to be accomplished by browbeating people about fascism. Like, some of us know what that is, others of us don't. But I think the more that we can be clear about the fact that the choice in November is whether or not we get to live to fight another day, the more people we will be able to bring into not just this fight, but honestly, into a broader movement for change. And to me, that is what's at stake. Frankly, we cannot afford for there to be a small group of very active people at the expense of millions of people who have everything at stake right now. So for me, the importance of this moment is that it's an opportunity for us to build the kind of movement that can win big, not just in November, but many more wins to come. I think the other piece of this here is, I think it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate our power. The selection of Senator Harris as vice president, or as the vice presidential candidate, is significant. One, because she is the first, or one of the first in many respects, but also it demonstrates that folks are getting clear about who is organized enough to impact these kinds of decisions. Frankly, we could have ended up with an all-white ticket. And I can tell you, there was a lot of push to make that happen. But I think the combination of the clarity of our organizing, the depth of our organizing, whether it be women, whether it be immigrants, whether it be Black people, whether it be Latinos, whether it be domestic workers, like, we are actually showing that politics in this country cannot and must not happen without us. And so, again, I think this November is an opportunity for us to show exactly how wide we have touched. And it's also an opportunity for us to show that there's a mandate for change. Mm-hmm. And that is actually what is going to get us to a place where we'll be able to fight the battles around shifting around immigration reform, the battles around essential workers, right? And making sure that our workplaces are safe and dignified. It's what gets us to the place of being able to level up on the fights that we've been fighting for so long. So I think that that's what's at stake right now.
Thank you. Such good points. You reminded me that it's important to also share the power of women organizing right now and showing, as you said, the work that we've been doing, the fruits of our labor are coming into play right now, the organizing we've been doing. And so I wanted to share some good news with people as we're going into the third big bold question, and that's that Moms Rising had a goal of having 1 million handwritten postcards, moms writing to low-frequency mom voters by October 1st. And I'm delighted to share with you that as of Monday, we had over 1,600,000 completed handwritten mom-to-mom postcards. We're having more volunteers this year than we ever expected possible. So to your point, Alicia, we are seeing change rising and that deep organizing work that's been going on for so long, making a difference, I know, in each of our organizations. So thank you for bringing that up. It's time for the third big, bold question. And as we've been sharing, it's an understatement to say that we are in unprecedented times. It's a pandemic. We're also in a time of national reckoning where more and more people are understanding that racial justice, gender justice, and economic justice are intertwined, and one absolutely never happens without the others. And also in this moment, police and state violence is still running unchecked. The police who murdered Breonna Taylor, a Black woman who was a very much loved essential worker, not that the type of work a person does should ever be a factor in police violence, still hasn't been brought to justice, and it has been over 150 days. Economic justice is on the line too, as many essential workers have been left out of basic workplace and health protection policies. So we have questions ahead of us. How are women, particularly women of color and essential workers, faring in this pandemic? And how importantly does that all relate to the election, to November 3rd? And importantly also to the absolute incredible power of women's votes. Let's also dive into that power a bit. Ai-jen we'd love to start with you.
Well, you know, if we were to all be honest, women and women of color in particular, Black women, came into this pandemic from not a great place, right? They're disproportionately 2/3 of all minimum wage workers are women, and women disproportionately have been working in low wage service jobs without sick days, paid leave, access to health care, right? This was the reality that we came into a global pandemic with. And so then the pandemic kind of unfolded, and you had women of color, Black and other women of color, on the front lines of every dimension of the crisis. The ongoing chronic, right, epidemics of anti-Black racism, police violence, inequality in our economy, the epidemic of low-wage work and its insecurity, all of that. And then you layered on top of that the acute crisis of COVID, where people weren't able to get access to healthcare, of the incredible and dramatic, unprecedented pace of job loss, and all that came with that. And then people were home with their kids who were home from school and had no infrastructure to support them. And as we all know, women of color are essential workers, right? Just essential workers across all of these different industries, from grocery workers to farm workers to care workers, right, to healthcare workers, all disproportionately women of color. And it's actually a pretty amazing breakthrough that we have this moment. We're actually seeing just how many people have been working under completely unsustainable conditions, and just how essential that work is to our very survival and safety. And the truth is that they're still unsafe. They're still out here working without PPE, without access to any kind of hazard pay. Their kids are not in camp or school, so they're having to figure out, do I take my kid to work with me, right? Just the most insane crisis of impossible choices in front of every single person, especially women and women of color in this moment. And we have not done hardly anything to support our essential workers, right? I think it's been great that we have been able to honor them through clapping and in other kind of cultural symbols of our support. But the truth is that essential workers need better wages. They need safety and health protections. They need childcare. They need, and we have not moved on those things. And that is what's at stake, right? And the elections. And we are actually the majority. Everybody thinks about the working class as this kind of mythical white man in a construction hat. Now we see who is the working class in this country. It's multiracial, and it's a lot of women and a lot of women of color. And that is who can change the game in terms of the outcome in November. That's who we need to be speaking to. That's who we need to be mobilizing. And that's who we need to be fighting for in our politics and our policy.
Thank you, thank you. Next up, we have Cecile Richards for this third big, bold question.
Well, Ai-jen, of course, your leadership, really the leadership of every woman on this on this panel and conversation has just been essential. And so I want to just acknowledge and thank you for that. I guess I just have three observations. One is, it's true, who would have thought a year ago, as we head into this election, that the most revered people in this country would be women on the front line of this pandemic: nurses, teachers, caregivers. And we cannot let that go. That is incredibly important. And they are, they're going to be fueling our recovery, and they are really animating an understanding of what is at stake and who's doing the work to get us out of this. And you sort of posit that, the women that iJen is talking about, against this administration. Who's actually showing up for every day and doing their job? And obviously, this is a stark contrast. The second piece is, I couldn't agree more that this pandemic has exposed structural inequity that we've all known about and folks have been working on forever. And it's time that we talk about not incremental change and not incremental solutions, but like, we got to flip the table, okay? My favorite example is, we spent $50 billion to bail out the airline industry. Why didn't we put $50 billion, as Elizabeth Warren has suggested and introduced legislation to do? Why didn't we put $50 billion in to stabilize the childcare industry? If we had done that work, and of course done the other work that we needed to do, we wouldn't have millions of families desperately trying to figure out what to do with their kids. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we need structural change. And when Alicia talks about what this election is, it is like it's the door opening to force through change that we have desperately needed for decades. And it's going to be fueled by what's happened to this pandemic and by millions of people getting engaged. And I guess that would be my third point, which is, and I'm just getting, okay, this is just a truth. I'm sure it's not the one that everybody wants to hear. But when folks talk about the fact that Joe Biden is ahead in this election, do you know why he's ahead? Because the gender gap is so big, you could drive a Mack truck through it. Right now, today, women, 30 points, led by, of course, Black women, women of color, and all us white women who we're trying to like kind of bring over the line. 30-point advantage for Joe Biden. With men, it's a dead heat. So if the election were held tomorrow and women couldn't vote, we would have 4 more years of Donald Trump. So what sweet justice would it be on the centennial of a very bittersweet anniversary of suffrage? Because as we know, it was not suffrage for all women. It was a suffrage that left Black women behind, and we must know our history to never repeat it. But what sweet justice would it be 100 years later that we elect Kamala Harris, the first woman vice president, the first Black person vice president, the first Indian American vice president, and it's done because women got it done. So they're into the sermon.
Thank you. Next up, we have Alicia Garza. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this question.
I don't know that I have much more to add to what has just been laid out so wonderfully. But I do think it's important for us to also just understand the contours of the relationship between police violence and state violence and women of color. So often the kind of images that we see of police violence are of Black, cisgender, assumedly heterosexual men. And actually the kind of vast majority of cases of police violence are directed towards people with disabilities, actually. And I think that why this matters in this context is that when we talk about work, when we talk about structures of support that have been crumbling for a long time and frankly are like disintegrating in this moment, we have to look at the relationship, I should say, of a deep and overinvestment in policing and an underinvestment and a divestment in the community supports that we need to be safe, to be well, and to be whole. And, there's so much conversation right now about how we increase public safety. There have been all of these calls around defunding police. And I think it's important for us to understand that in this election cycle, what is at stake is our ability to invest in the community supports that, frankly, the conservative consensus has been trying to and has been successfully attacking as it relates to the infrastructure that keeps our communities well, dignified, safe, and whole. And I put this question of public safety at the center of this because what we do know is that safety increases when people have meaningful work that is well paid, that is protected, where you don't have to worry about going to work and possibly being harassed or violated, where you don't have to worry about going to work and experiencing raids, right? Like these are the kinds of conditions, right, that we can actually fight for. Like in some ways they're on the ballot. And, I want to make sure that we have that perspective and that framework as we're talking about the relationship between public safety and work and this election cycle. We should really be looking at this moment as an opportunity to put champions in place who are ready to rebuild the infrastructure that is needed to move this country forward and to expand not just the safety net, but like the care net that we all need at the intersection of these really important and sharpened and heightened crises. I'm in California right now. I was just reading an article about that we're in the midst of a sustained and dangerous heat wave. We're in the middle of a climate crisis at the same time that we're in the midst of a global pandemic, at the same time that we're in the midst of a crisis in our democracy and a deepening economic recession. And while that may feel chaotic, it's also an incredible moment of opportunity. And I think that what November is about is creating the conditions where we can build the kinds of vehicles that are needed to rebuild what has been broken, and frankly, to introduce new ways of organizing ourselves, new ways of keeping each other safe, and new ways of investing in each other's humanity. So that's what I think about what's possible right now and how all of those different things relate to get us there.
Thank you. Maria Teresa Kumar, you're up next.
So the question I think is really centers around the work that a lot of us do. And if we have a complete frank conversation of who the essential worker is and what they are not receiving, we could go down the list of mental health care. We're going to talk about this idea that they're not getting access to childcare, that they're not getting basic living wages. But when Congress passed the CARES Act, 20% of the Latinx worker was completely omitted from any type of the $1,200 relief, let alone the $600 check. And that was because they were US citizens living with undocumented folks or undocumented, even though documented individuals pay $27 billion into our federal coffers every single year. 1.7 million Asian American workers were left out because of the same criteria. When we say that right now that folks are concerned because they're waiting eviction notices, when we say that the unemployment benefits are about to dry up, let's be clear, they're about to dry up because Mitch McConnell refuses to sign the HEROES Act that Congress passed in May 15th of this year. They have been sitting back for almost 3 months while Latinos, African Americans, people of color, poor people, essential workers are trying to make it, and they can't even make it paycheck to paycheck. That is malpractice. That is selfishness. And I would claim that that is not patriotic. Our job right now is to make sure that we are providing individuals more than just a lifeline and more just this opportunity of hope, but bringing them to the table and have a fundamental reexamination of the country that we need in order to thrive in the 21st century. And the only way we do that is inviting the folks that are low propensity voters, sitting down with them, talking to them, and recognizing that there's literally more of us. I hate the word minority because every time I hear minority, I tell people, we're talking about 135 million people strong. That's 40% of Americans. For the very first time, 1 out of 10 naturalized citizens will be able to cast a ballot. We have a like-minded understanding of what we want the future to look like, but we keep being absent from the table because we're not enfranchised. And we have to be bold, and we have to make demands, and we have to be clear that those demands are not anything that we haven't worked for. because we are losing loved ones as a result of crisis and being immoral. And if you were to ask me if I could have one conversation right now with, with the white voters that Cecile was talking about, of bringing the white women back to us, we have to talk about the morality and immorality of Pence. Because the reason that Donald Trump right now has a dotted line to the evangelical community is that Pence walks as if he is on higher ground and morality, at the same time that we have an administration that is allowing children to decay in cages. There's no morality in that. And the more that we can stick to that and make sure that people are understanding what really is at stake and how we have to re-examine our own religious beliefs, if that's what we're going to stick with, then we can have a come to Jesus moment and really be honest of what is it that is at stake. Because it's not just a matter of, yes, the policy, but it's really, frankly, having someone to look in the mirror and say, would I leave my family safe under Donald Trump? Because I can't imagine anyone agreeing with that.
Thank you. Our next topic, we're going to dive into an area that each of our panelists have touched on a bit. It's the nexus of paid and unpaid work and policy. We're talking about caregiving, teaching, raising children, childcare, the impact of police violence and mass incarceration, paid leave and sick days, closed schools, and joblessness. We're talking about that when this many people are facing the same struggles at the same time, we don't have an epidemic of personal failures. We have national structural issues that we can and must solve together. In this moment, the paid and unpaid work of caregiving that's primarily been done by women has not only been significantly devalued in our country to the degree that it fuels intense wage gaps that look like this in 2020. Latina moms earn just 45 cents to a white dad's dollar. Native American moms earn just 47 cents. Black moms just 50 cents. White moms just 69 cents. And AAPI moms earn just 89 cents to a white dad's dollar. This intense devaluation and discrimination is putting millions of workers in untenable situations and hurting our families and our economy in big ways. Women are fully half of the paid labor force. 3/4 of moms are breadwinners, and we are the majority of decision makers in our consumer-fueled economy, upon which 72% of our GDP is based on consumer spending decisions. Suffice to say, we are economic superheroes. We are active in our country and communities, and we need and demand real solutions. So, the very complicated series of questions to our panelists, of which we hope the panelists can answer in their area of expertise, starts with, what policy changes and solutions should a new president and a new Congress and a new US Senate in particular be sure to make in 2021? And how, and this is important, and this is a leading question, has women's leadership powerfully shaped important rising policy solutions like the CARE agenda and the BREATHE Act? Because let me tell you, women are shaping our future. Let's also touch on how these systems and policies intersect. I told you this was a big question. For instance, in what ways does mass incarceration and structural racism throughout our criminal justice system hurt women, particularly women of color, and caregivers also in particular? And how do these systems intersect? These are big issues. These are intersectional issues with a core question in the middle of policy solutions. So what's on the top of your list for a new president and a new Congress, and especially that brand new Senate that we're all envisioning? And how have women's contributions and needs shaped that list? We're gonna start out with Cecile Richards. Thank you for participating with the giantest question on the planet. What's your take?
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna lean on my sisters here for who I've thought a lot about policy, but I will note it's interesting. I think folks may know that yesterday was Black Women's Equal Pay Day, which of course yesterday, August 13th, I think I got my dates right. I can't, in the pandemic, I don't remember what day it is, but that was the day that by that day, Black women would earn finally what white men earned in 2019. So that's how much, that just to give you a sense, this whole equal pay thing isn't a question of a small issue. It is an enormous issue. And so I just will throw that out as something that we can solve, and what we're lacking, and actually everyone supports it. It's just no one in Congress, no one in office right now has felt like the heat to actually make it happen. And so I guess so that's way up on my list. I hope Jen will talk about the proposal that she has worked on for years and that the domestic workers have. And I know Kamala Harris has been, I think, the introducing sponsor of beginning to actually address caregivers' salaries in this country, and a policy where actually we could have affordable childcare and take care of caregivers at the same time. So I would put those at the top of the list. My feeling generally is we actually have good policy ideas. We just have not built the political will and heat in this country to make them happen. And so I guess my hope is so I guess I'm kind of avoiding the, list of policy issues, but really what I think we have to do in this election is have such an overwhelming turnout around a set of issues that have been left to the bottom, mainly issues that affect people of color, women of color, and have such a resounding mandate that finally our issues get ahead of the bailout of the airline industry, that we get ahead of roads and bridges and all the things that seem to always get the resources. I think we need a Women's Recovery Act, frankly. And I hope that in a new administration and with the kind of movement that we're seeing, we can have the political will that is the throw weight heavy enough to actually make things change.
Thank you. Next up is Alicia Garza. What's your take?
I have a lot to say about this. But one of the things that is really inspiring to me right now is that so much of the visionary solutions that we need are being put forward in a range of ways. So you mentioned the Breathe Act, which I think of as this generation's Civil Rights Act, which really is making concrete what it means to move from a punishment economy to a caring economy. And it is being powered and spearheaded by Black women and by women of color. And it is being lifted, right, by several dozen organizations throughout our ecosystem. If we are successful in passing landmark legislation like this, I think we will not only see shifts happening at the federal level, but we'll also see shifts happening in cities and states. And not just around policing, but around investments in education, investments in healthcare, investments in housing, investments in jobs. And, right, it starts to also redirect resources from the structures in our society that are the locus of so much pain for so many of our communities, from ICE to military spending to policing in our communities. It's a fundamental way for us to think about how we reprioritize how resources are being used in our communities and how we reinvest in communities that have been divested from. So that is very exciting to me. I'm also very excited about the wide range of agendas that have been put forward in this moment. We're getting a women's agenda, right? We're getting a Black domestic workers agenda. We've got a Black agenda for 2020 that my organization has put forward that looks at how we make Black Lives Matter from City Hall to Congress. We've got universal family care as a core pillar of the Biden-Harris platform. And I think that what is possible in this moment is that millions more people can be involved in the technique of what it means to fight rigged rules and change them. I know in my organization, we've launched this year a Black to the Future Public Policy Institute. And right this very minute, we are training 39 Black fellows from 9 states across the country to understand how to write policy, how to win policy, and how to implement policy in cities and states. No matter what happens in 2020, we are having to change rules in our communities, and we need to build the kind of bench where everyday people who are the closest to the pain can get much closer to the power that we deserve. So I'm really excited about this moment. I could throw up a bunch of millions of policies, like Cecile said, but I think that what's even more important here is who's making the new rules that are going to shape the next few years in this nation.
Thank you, thank you. Maria Teresa, you're up.
So first of all, I have to say, I love, Cecile, the women's recovery agenda. I'm there for that. So any way that we could be helpful, absolutely in for that. I love it. I think it gets to the core of what we're discussing. I do think that we have to fix our, I'm going to be wonky now. We do have to fix access to the ballot box. Now, Latinas, we did not get full enfranchisement until 1975. This is something that is fairly new, but we also recognize that that is how we win and change policy. So I would be wonky and ask for the HR1 all over again that addresses everything. And that includes automatic voter registration. Voto Latino, we should be in the business of persuasion. We should not be carrying out a government function. That's obscene and that's absurd. And so I would be in all for that. The other two things that I would look at is we are in a climate crisis of our lifetime, of a generation. And if we want to be thoughtful of how we reimagine the country and how we can do it through economic development and parity and justice, it would be through a climate lens. And I would encourage us to really think of how we push the new administration to do that. I was surprised by the administration, having conversations with them. And one of the things that they have omitted is everything around gig workers. That is our community. That should be front and center. And so pushing them on what does that policy look like so that we can have, again, a frank conversation on who are the people doing the gig economies. And we can we will be expecting many more of those with entering such a great economic depression. And then equally as important, I would say we need comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. There's 11 million people that live in this country that are constantly being harassed with police brutality and ICE. And by extension, the 60 million of us who are also brown. We are in complete alignment and allyship with Black Lives Matter because we know what it is to wake up in the morning and to walk out our doors and not know if one of our loved ones will come back. It is part of a cloud that carries us. And the only way we should tackle it is to ensure that we have the legislation that Alicia mentioned, simultaneously though, making sure that people can safely walk out of the shadows so that they can no longer be bullied, harassed, or targeted. And that will allow us to actually get the job that needs to get done. And that is plenty to fix this country.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jen, you're up next. What's your take?
Well, I would just second all the things that have been mentioned so far. And two things come to mind. One is Naomi Klein sometimes talks about moving from a dig and gig economy to a care and repair economy. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really helpful framework, right? To think about what can be made possible by a new policy framework and a new Senate and a new political system, one that was actually reflective. And I think about what Alicia was talking about in terms of what we need to divest from and what we need to invest in. And I feel really actually hopeful about the fact that we've actually made a ton of progress on both what we need to divest from and in terms of where the public is. We have majoritarian support for a lot of the measures that we're talking about to divest funding from really punitive and cruel systems of policing and immigration enforcement. And we also have majoritarian support for essential workers, for low-wage workers, and for a new vision for the care economy for the first time. And so I just think like actually a ton is possible to move us towards these values that are transformative. It's not, we're no longer in the era of kind of technocratic fixes around the edges of systems that are fundamentally broken. We're in an era of reimagining, and we're doing that reimagining. And we do need the political will and the heat that Cecile talked about to make it a reality. That's what the next few months are about, is doing the work. And I'll just say one thing, as somebody who's worked on caregiving issues for a very long time, we have always, you and I, Kristin, we've been like in the trenches on, hello, childcare is not a women's issue, right? Long-term care is not about older people. It's actually about family. It's about jobs. It's about work. It's about all the things that are supposed to be at the core of American values. And we've really done a lot to try to say, like, the care economy is the economy, right? It's just like when we at Supermajority, we talk about how the women's agenda is just the agenda, right? What's good for women is actually good for the country. And, you know, I think what we're seeing in the Biden economic plan is the fact that the care economy has really made it to the center of the economic agenda, and that understanding that care jobs, these jobs that have always been held disproportionately by Black and brown women, are actually the jobs of the future. And we have to make them good jobs, living wage jobs with benefits and representation and a voice. And that's our New Deal jobs program, right? These women are gonna be a huge part of how we recover and realize the future that we deserve. And we're starting to see that reflected back in agendas, in platforms, in priorities. And I think that that's a sign that we not only can win, that we will win if we do our jobs right.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Speaking of doing our jobs right, the next question is about exactly that. It's about the title of this panel, The Power of Women Voters Rising. Let's talk power for a moment. Power to enact change, power to elect new leaders, power to put forward new leaders who will finally pass these policies. So what role will women play in this upcoming election? And what role will Black and Latinx women specifically play in this election and elections to come? How are we going to change the world?
Well.
That's your first up. Thank you, Alicia.
Yes. So here's what I know. What I know is that Black women vote at higher rates than all women, right? And that we have been a decisive force in the last, at least in the last 3 election cycles in this country. What I also know is that when women stay home, bad things happen. So even though more than 90% of Black women who were registered to vote and voted in the 2016 election voted for the Democratic candidate, there were 10% of Black women who were registered, were eligible to vote, who voted in the previous 2 elections, who decided to stay home. What happens when we decide to stay home? We get somebody who's pretending to be the president. And when Black communities stay home, when Latinx communities stay home, when women stay home, bad things happen in this country. But when we show up, when we turn out, and when we turn up, we have, and we've demonstrated that we have the power to make good things happen in this country. Women are who made it happen in terms of getting a woman as the running mate for the president. Women are what happens when we get an unprecedented number of women of color in Congress for the first time in history, right? That is what happens when our communities turn up and turn out. And I can say that in this election cycle, why this is important is because all of the things we've been talking about in this panel thus far around essential workers, around immigration reform, around quality jobs, right? As Ijen said, That's not the women's agenda. That's the agenda, right? That should lead this country. But frankly, if why it's important that Black women, that women of color, right, that women are the center force in making good things happen in this country is because we're closest to all of the things that are wrong in this country right now. And so when we are activated, when we are motivated, we are doing so from that place of wanting to see the kinds of changes that matter in our lives. And the changes that matter in our lives are the changes that matter to everybody. And so that's what's at stake right now in this election. And that is the base of our power. And again, if we are not activated, if we are not energized, if we are not motivated to turn out, bad things happen in this country. And I think we've seen it time and time again.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Next up, we have Ai-jen Poo for your take.
Well, I just really agree with everything that Alicia said, and I know for sure that the women in the domestic workers movement are fired up and ready to do the work and have been. I mean, in 2016, they gave us a mandate. And here we are, we've been building towards this moment for the last 3 years. And they know what's at stake. And no matter how hard they're struggling, they're clear about what's at stake and ready to do the work. So I hope that all of you, I mean, I know all of you who are watching this are ready to do the work and get to work. And I think it's just a question of reaching beyond and really seeing no woman voter left behind in this context, right? This is our time to really push and leave nothing on the field or everything on the field. I don't know the sports metaphors.
Absolutely everything on the field. I'm with you,
Maria. Leave it all on the field. Leave it all on the field. That's what we'll do. And 120,000 agreement. This is the thing, is that we know that when we register and engage a Latinx voter, they show up. The job is inviting them to the conversation. Of the 248,000 folks that we have registered as of this morning, 75% of them are women, 80% of them are under the age of 33. And Cecile, you're gonna love this, 137,000 of them are from Texas. So there is no doubt in my mind that people are concerned. When we see voter registration efforts actually start climbing in unusual spots, we know that there's something happening at the local level and people are looking for oxygen. They're looking for a lifeline. And for them, they have made the connection that voting is that lifeline if we are there at the same time to meet their needs. And so I encourage us to have those conversations of register, vote, because while 2016 was a crappy election for all of us, remind them of what happened when a record number of us turned out in 2018. It was the very first time that we had Generation XYZ outvote baby boomers and older voters. It was the most diverse election of our lifetime. And we voted in a Congress that looks closer like America. And the 400 pieces of legislation that Cecile was alluding to, that we have good policy, 400 pieces of legislation that speak to our values, where we're talking about domestic worker fair pay, where we're talking about gun reform, where we're talking about Black Lives Matter, where we're talking about immigration reform, where they're talking about climate change, 400 pieces of legislation that speak to our values. Our job now in 2020 is to finish the job, take back the Senate, occupy the White House, but we could only occupy if every single one of us and our loved ones occupy the voting booth in November. And it's going to be women who lead that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll just add 2 quick things, because I know we've covered the waterfront here, but this is actually kind of the core thing, right? Mm-hmm. And with the help of everybody on this panel, including our moderator, we launched Supermajority a little more than a year ago, because as an organizer, I think, and as organizers, it felt like I don't want anybody at this moment to not have everything they need to do to get more folks out to vote. To Alicia's point, what I do not want to hear is anyone saying, I just don't know what to do. Because if you don't know what to do, you're not paying attention. That means so you can, and if I could figure it out, I would drop a link in here. But if you can't figure out what to do, You can sign up with the domestic workers. You can sign up with Voto Latino. You can sign up with Moms Rising. You can sign up at Supermajority. We will give you work to do. You can sign up at all the 18 organizations that Alicia Garza single-handedly is running herself. It is, so I don't want anybody and nobody on this call saying later, well, I didn't know what to do. There's a ton to do. And this is the moment. So no excuses and no regrets. And then I think the only other thing, and we probably won't have time to talk about it on this, but it is what Maria Teresa raised. Donald Trump is going to do every single thing he can to shut down this election. So whether you're talking about the post office, whether you were talking about restrictions to mail-in balloting or whatever. And so it is going to be incumbent on all of us to do everything we can to get folks to vote, to let them, in a supermajority, you can find out, are you registered, where you vote, what the rules are. And the other thing that folks on this call need to be prepared to do is, we are not going to know, unless it's some amazing blowout that we don't, that is just, unbelievable. We will not know who the president is on November 4th. There's going to be a record number of mail-in ballots. There's going to be we've never gone through an election before. And so everybody in this, watching this panel, you got to be prepared, not just to vote on November 3rd, but to be in the streets on November 4th and 5th
Right.
and 6th and 7th, and as long as it takes for us to have a democratically elected president of the United States, because this guy's not going willingly. And that's going to be the work for all of us.
That's right.
Thank you, thank you. And while we're at it, everybody right now should double, triple check that you are registered to vote. Hello, who are the people who are most likely to be pushed off the voter rolls? It's women who often change their names as we change our relationship statuses. So go ahead, you can go to any of our websites. We all have voter registration links so that you can check your vote, but go ahead and check your vote and then really, really, really make a plan to vote and keep paying attention, because the ways that people have the opportunities to vote are opening up and changing in this election for November 3rd. Some places are adding drop boxes where you can drop off your ballot. Some places are changing the date that your mail-in ballot is due. Big tip, request your mail-in ballot or your absentee ballot. By the way, they're one and the same thing. And when you get it in the mail, fill it out and send it back that very same day. We have an issue, as you've heard, with our panelists with the U.S. Postal Service. So don't delay. Get your ballot, fill it out, send it back in immediately. No waiting. But the big news is that we're all here fighting with all of you who are listeners, with all of you who are viewers, with all of you in the audience to make sure every single person who wants to vote can vote. And we're relying on you to make sure that you check your vote and make sure your voter registration status is updated, because a lot of people, too many people, are getting pushed off the rolls. We're going to have one more question, then we're going to look to questions from our audience. So go ahead and put some questions in that Q&A, in the Q&A function that we have. The last question is a really important one. It's one that we actually are getting from a lot of people online right now, and that is, it's time for tactics for powering up. We've got a lot of people who are engaged. A lot of people are watching, viewing. What are the most effective ways that each of you are seeing people, including women, most effectively rising, organizing, working together, and preparing to safely go out to vote? Because we're going to make sure voting is safe and fun, people. It's going to be a movement and a moment right here, November 3rd. And also, while you're at it, feel free to add how people can get involved in each of your organizations. Go ahead and pitch the best URL for people. We're going to start right in with iGen Poo.
Well, I think one inspiring thing is that all of us in this circle are working together in really deep ways and have been for some time. And I think we're also working across movements, right? There's a lot of ways in which immigrant rights groups and racial justice groups and women's groups and all kinds of organizations are working together to strengthen the movement for Black lives, to strengthen the work around care, to strengthen the work around the economy and economic recovery for essential workers. Like, we're actually in this together, and we've been practicing for a while now. And I think that any one of the organizations that you would go to, you would find incredibly meaningful work. And I'd say that the mandate is just to find your lane, get in it, and get busy. Yeah.
We need a tune to that. We need music.
I have a whole playlist to that.
Yeah. It should be just the get busy, like the
So busy. Cecile, what are your thoughts? How can folks really effectively organize right now?
Look, I mean, I think Jen said it. Like, just don't wait to be asked. Don't wait for instructions. There's no perfect solution to all the stuff that we're facing. But if everybody does more than we've ever done before, we're going to get there. And I do think it's important, because I've been sort of the elation at the announcement that Kamala Harris was going to be our vice presidential nominee was so much. And then, of course, immediately we begin seeing racist, sexist attacks. And even if you know they're coming, it can really it really is a gut punch, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think it's really important. Do not let these guys, the bad guys, take away our joy and our energy, because that's the only thing they have. They got nothing to sell. All they can do is try to bring us down, discourage us, tell us they're going to steal the vote, all of that. So if we just got each other's back and we just keep going together and boost each other up, we're going to get there. But I just feel like it's really important, don't focus on the people who are trying to bring us down. Focus on the folks who are counting on us to get this done right, and invite them in. We do that. Yeah. We're the majority, or as we like to say, we're the super majority of this country.
Thank you. Alicia?
Cecile said it. There are so many efforts out here that people can get involved with. And so I would just encourage you not to try to recreate the wheel, help build something that's out there. And if there's something that isn't meeting your needs, then yes, definitely build it. But whatever you do, don't sit out. I saw a question in the chat, for example, about trying to put together a voter registration program for trans communities. We're happy to be a resource for that. At the Black Futures Lab, we have a program called Black to the Ballot, where we are partnering with more than 24 grassroots organizations across the nation that are in communities that are often not targeted for voter registration programs. And so, some of our partners are small grassroots organizations focused on organizing trans women in places like Alabama, right? In places like Florida, in places like California. So reach out and touch somebody with consent and ask those kinds of questions. And I guarantee you, especially at a gathering like this, somebody's got a connection for you. If you're interested in figuring out how to get involved on our end, you can hit up holla@blackfutureslab.org. Also, definitely get involved with Supermajority, with Voto Latino, with Moms Rising, with the National Domestic Workers Alliance, Care in Action. There's so many places where you can plug in. So just make sure you don't stay home, and make sure that you don't sit this one out. You will be very mad at yourself later on if you do.
We may not invite you to the parties. I'm kidding.
That's right. Facts.
You'll be looking out. So Kristin, just very quickly, I think I'll be honest, we get asked this question all the time, and people contort themselves feeling that they have to reimagine who they are because they're not doing enough in the moment. And what I want every single person to do is take a step back, take a deep breath, and say, what is your superpower? What are you good at? Whatever you're good at, whether you are a graphic artist, whether you're a photographer, whether you're a dancer, whether you're a yoga instructor, whether you are an organizer, whether you're a chief executive at a company, lean into that. Because what we're going to need to defeat this ugliness is the utter beauty of our diversity in this moment. I encourage you to join and volunteer at the groups that are listed here at Voto Latino. If you want to volunteer with us, text volunteer to 73179 and we will put you to work. Since the pandemic, we have done relational organizing. We have contacted over 600,000 registered voters that no one else is going to contact anyway. And we give them the information on vote by mail. We give them information about their primaries. We go down the list. So and if you want to do a little bit more, we have actual toolkits that you can share along your social media. If you're a part of an organization, we actually work right now. We've identified over 100 affinity groups in corporate America, because they have to be our allies, and giving them the information they need. So it's one. It's like, what is your superpower? Lean into that. 2, participate in one of these organizations. Everybody here is fabulous. And then the last one, be very mindful of what you share on social media. And I say this because when we talk about Russian operatives infiltrating our social web and with disinformation, we are the agents of physically actually sharing that information. So I would encourage us to be very cautious of what we share, because we might be inadvertently actually doing the disinformation suppression of other actors, not knowing, because it seems legitimate. Just be very mindful, because they are using us and our passions and our anger against the injustice in a way that is not only divisive, but actually helps the other side. So just be mindful.
Thank you. I'm keeping my eye on the time and on the questions that are in the box. We've answered many of them. I do want to share just a double down that people should join the organizations, all of them if you want, some of them if you want, but there are spectacular programs that are running right now, even in a pandemic, of relational organizing, of texting out the vote, of adopting precincts, of calling out the vote, of mailing out the vote. And Rising is doing them, and every organization on this panel is doing them. So it's going to take all of us and then some to win, and we're going to make it fun, people. We're going to win, and we're going to make it fun. There are some questions on here in the from the audience that is really looking at how do we sign up other people. So we've talked just briefly about what do we do ourselves, but we have a question or 2 or 3 or 4 about how do we build our own personal movements. And we don't have much time left, so I'm wondering if folks can just quickly answer who want to answer that.
I would just say that we actually provide Voto Latino in a box. So for folks who want it, we will actually give it to you, and you can do everything that you need. We also developed Voter Pal, and Voter Pal is specifically for the non-organizer and allows you to seamlessly register your friends and family. Apple called it one of the top 4 political apps in 2018. And most recently, it was also featured as one of the top apps to actually fight racism and social inequities. So, and I'll type it in here.
Other thoughts?
I think it's such a good question too, Kristin, because it's something I meant to mention earlier. Is I think sometimes we think, oh, we have to have like lists of thousands of people, and we have to do, actually, as we all know, like relational organizing, actually getting your own squad together is really one of the most important things you can do. And then you do that, and then they can continue to like build. I know that we probably all offer relational organizing training, and I know through Supermajority and the work we're doing with Facebook Messenger, easily you can refer other folks to tools, to information, because that is in this world that we are not going to be doing the kind of things that most of us love to do right around this time, which is knock on doors and be all together. There's a lot of tools that I love. Someone asked something about like, or just said, there's a lot of activities for people who actually don't want to get on the phone with people. There's all kinds of tools now, texting, letter writing that you were talking about, Kristin. So there's actually something for everybody, I think, now.
Other thoughts on organizing in our communities? I would just add that if you're in a community that needs a tough conversation, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 200, then that is also an important way of organizing. So really, we see a question in here about expanding our circles in terms of organize other people who are on a similar political wavelength as us to help get out the vote. And then there's also questions in the question box about how do we expand the number of people who are really working for equity, equality, and justice. And I would add in the tough conversation piece there too. Be sure that you reach out to your friends, families, and neighbors and have those tough conversations. And be sure that you help get out the vote. Are there thoughts on that to the panelists? All right. Another question that we see here is, how do we develop better messaging on social media? Maria Teresa, you talked about, being careful on social media. Social media is also an area where we're each our own media outlet in our own right, on accident almost. Nobody planned to be accidental media outlets, but many of us, many of our viewers, many of our listeners are also accidental media outlets. Do you all have tips on messaging and content for social media during this time?
So I just briefly mentioned that we're preparing toolkits for what we call verticals. So we have one for our influencers, one for corporate ERGs, and then we're doing one final one for basically everyone who wants to volunteer at VL. They won't be ready for another 2 weeks, but the idea is that we will be providing you with message testing that we've done with other organizations on how to dispel misinformation, how to get your ballot box ready, just all the fun stuff that is oftentimes left to the side, but it's just practical information. And we will literally be packaging it so that we recognize that this is not what people do every single day. They don't wake up every day trying to figure out how to get more voters and how to make sure that people's vote is safe. So we're trying to make it really pretty and really beautiful so that it speaks to your audience brand, and people feel comfortable that it's vetted, tested information so that it is distributable and so that people feel safe. But that's what we're doing, but they won't be ready for another 2 weeks. So I encourage people to text volunteer to 73179 and requesting those kits, and they will come.
Kristin, I feel like the disadvantage of being the moderator is that you don't get to actually answer the question.
You should answer this one.
You should have been answering all of these questions because you're amazing and Moms Rising's work is amazing, but you're like the messaging goddess, so you should talk about this question.
Well, we are all here messaging goddesses, just to be fully truthful. At Moms Rising, we are creating a messaging force. People can sign up at momsrising.org. We'll send you 5 top messaging tips that you can use each week throughout the election. These messaging tips are not just going to be coming from Moms Rising. We are collating the best of the best from organizations like those that are on this call. We're not about working to build Moms Rising. We are about working to build a movement and change. So we'll be bringing you content from lots of other organizations, including those on this panel. And we also, if you want to sign up to adopt a precinct to help get out the vote in a precinct during this pandemic, sign up with Moms Rising as well. And then we also are fighting hard in Congress, thank you, iJen, right now to help get those emergency measures through. So go ahead and text "do your job," all one word, 747-464. Right now, go ahead and do it to reach out to your U.S. senators who have basically, led by the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate, taken a rain check on saving our nation. But we need to bring them back into their office, back to work, so they do their job, 747-464. So I just want to say that the biggest thing about Moms Rising is we learn, we listen, we learn from our members, we learn from our colleagues, we learn from our partners. And I want to thank every single one of the panelists who have been on today, who have shared with all of us, with me, with our audience, the brilliant tips, the hope for justice, the hope for change, and the fuel and the power for change. We have 1 minute left. In 5 seconds, can each of you share what brings you hope? What brings me hope is all of you. iJen, first. One word, hope.
Women of color.
Cecile.
Sisterhood. That's it.
Sisterhood, I'm there with Cecile.
And Alicia.
Organizing.
Organizing, yes, sisterhood, women power, women of color. Thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you for being on, to our listeners, to our audience. Please sign up with all of these organizations: Supermajority, Black Futures Lab, Voto Latino, Domestic Workers Alliance, and more. I want to note that you should check in the bios of every one of these speakers, because every single one of these speakers has multiple organizations, because they're that powerful and awesome. Thank you all.
Be well. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.